you probably know Brian already. If you don't, he is the assistant manager of the barn, he's a historian, he's a Civil War reenactor, and he provided some moonshine today too, which we all got a little bit of. So he will be giving his third Trust Talk, so veteran Trust Talk speaker, and we talked about moonshine and some trivia related to it. It should be a good talk. So with that, come on in.
There it is. Good evening. How's everybody doing on this rainy night? I'm glad everybody's got boats so y'all can get here. A lot of rain we've had today, but it's all good, clean water. As most of you know, most of my speeches are about the Civil War era and the history that comes from our local area. And tonight I thought about bringing in something a little different. Mr. Kalmbach, we had talked about it before, about doing a moonshine speech, and it's just like, well, I don't know, maybe. And so I've been experimenting with this for a little while, and thought I would bring it out and let you try it. Everybody likes the apple pie, I hope. As growing up as a child, we lived on a farm, and every fall we would have what's called a cane grinding. And I don't know whether, do any of you know what a cane grinding is? I see one back there. Well, every year on the farm we would grow sugar cane. And then in the fall we would harvest the sugar cane and we would have a cane grinding. So what that was, we had a cane mill, which is a mill, two big pieces of metal, and we would feed the cane through this mill we'd have a horse tied to a limber, and the horse or mule would go in circles, and we would feed the sugar cane into the mill, and then collect the juice off of it. Now, my grandfather loved this stuff, and to me it was just like wet grass. It was just watered down grass. But we would take it off of the mill, and we had a separate building off with, everybody now has the fire pits with what we call the big kettles, the syrup kettles. Well, the syrup kettles we used back then, we would take all the juice from the cane grindings and put them in the kettle and then build a fire underneath it, and then we would cook that sweet grass juice down to syrup and make cane syrup out of it. But there were always several jars of that cane juice that got put aside. And I kept asking, well, Granddaddy, go to the refrigerator and take a swig off of that. And it's just like, after a while it ferments, and they add a little bit of yeast to it and it ferments, so it becomes like I call it grass wine, but it was a drink. Now, my grandfather didn't drink any other thing, but that once a year was the cane grinding juice and fermenting that. And, well, that got kind of interesting. Fermentation has been going on for centuries. I mean, even from the dawn of man, many primitive animals would stumble across a fermented berry or a fermented bush, and I guess they would realize that that was pretty good. And after a couple, 30 minutes or so, yeah, it was even better. So, yeah, fermentation's been around for a long time, until man comes along, and man comes along, and then fermentation just isn't enough. We've got to do something else, and the chemists come up with distillation, which is making a weaker alcohol and condensing it down to something that's even more powerful, something more that we could enjoy. So, through the Middle Ages, wine, the Roman era, wine, many wars have been started over alcohol, many bloodsheds have been fought over alcohol, and it followed our early settlers to America. And George Washington had his own brewery, had his own distillation at his home, and practiced and worked with it. Most people think, well, of course they produce whiskey. And whiskey is nothing more than moonshine that's put in a barrel and aged for a certain amount of time. The longer it sits, the moonshine takes on the characteristics of the barrel, and thus the longer it sits, the more characteristics and the more flavor that whiskey absorbs. People started wondering, well, we got to speed this process up because we've got to wait 10 years for a barrel. We got to come up with something better than that. So they started drinking the moonshine out of the still. Well, the stories about going blind after drinking moonshine, well, it's true because there are certain alcohols that come across early in the distillation process that are really pretty hazardous to your health and can cause problems. I think the blindness just comes from drinking yourself to a point where you can't see, but permanent blindness, But anyway, the local area here, we have so many islands in this area, and when Prohibition started, everybody got into the game of making your own whiskey and trying to sell it and try to make a living. They found out they could actually make a good living off of making shine or making rum, or whiskey just took too long. But you would always take the cream of the crop. A good distiller would take the cream of his crop and stick it aside, and he would age it. Being a musician for so many years and traveling, you always figure out that the drummer in the band is the guinea pig any place you go, because somebody's always coming out of the crowd going, here, try this. So I've sampled moonshine from Georgia to Pennsylvania, and the different flavors and the different areas have different varieties. It's all in how they mix it and how you mash it. So alcohol is made basically from a sugar product. You have to take sugar, yeast, ferment it, and it produces alcohol in your mixture. Your mixture also comes across with characteristics from that mixture. So Applejack, what we call Applejack, is basically moonshine that's made from apples. Most moonshine is made from corn. Corn liquor. Corn liquor, which is a southern term, liquor. White Lightning, Mule Kick. Happy Sally was an interesting name. But it all started somebody either trying to make a living, somebody trying to get a buzz, and to be happy. Alcohol has seen wars, deaths, birthdays, weddings, toasted to love. It goes along with everything. I'm not a real heavy drinker. I'm a social drinker. So being on the road after all these years and learning all these different flavors, some friends of mine go, well, if the world was to end, we need to come up with some plan here. And funny thing, the first plan we came up with making a still. So we started doing some research on our still and our process, and this little device we have up here, this is our prototype. After looking through the different kinds of stills, most people, the old timers, use a pot still, which is a copper pot, copper top, and then it had a series of copper coils that came off the top and coiled down and then went into your collect device. That was the copper pot method. Copper pot method allowed for a slower cook time and would actually give you the best flavor out of all of them. The old timers say. Stills were always placed by a clean, nice, good water source, someplace hidden. The term moonshiners actually comes from Britain. It's any illegal activity that happens after dark. The moon had to come in no matter what you were doing. A moonshiner, well, you were a shiner. You're a person that made illegal whiskey. Prohibition came in, and the taxation on liquor got to a point where it was $10.50 a gallon. What the federal tax was on liquor. South Carolina's tax in the early 1900s was $4 a gallon. So at that time, that was like $50 a gallon today. So people found it easier to make their own or to make it and make a living off of it. Depends on how good it was. People will come from miles around for good corn liquor. That's my southernism, I'm sorry, liquor. That's what we've always known it as. But there are different methods of it. The still that we decided to run with was an easier method. It's a more effective method. It's called a reflux method. We use our pot at the bottom. The mash that we make.
Can you hold it up?
Sure. I'll get there in a second. I'll get back a little bit more detail. Because we need to start with the mash. The mash is where it all comes from. The mash can either be made with corn. Any high sugar content can be used. Either it be tequila, whiskey, scotch. It all starts in the same process. Just a different chemical makeup of what it starts with. Corn and sorghum, the sugar cane, all are your basis for your alcohol production. Some people use fruits, any high fruit, apples, which is my choice. I love working with apples. I can do a lot with them. I can get, with certain yeasts, I can get a very high content of alcohol production over 4 or 5 week periods. You have to make this mash up, and you either, for what I use with my apples, is mashing the apples, making a pulp out of them, just making a mash and all the juice, adding a little bit more water into it to get it mixed, adding the secret ingredients. But there are other stuff that goes into it too that makes it, but that's a trade secret.
Give us some hints.
It's spices. Spices. I like working with spices too because spices infuse in with the alcohol. So, and it gives it a different flavor. Apples we've used watermelon, oranges, lemons, and just combine it all into one mash. And the right yeast is the very important thing. Yeast you can buy at the grocery store for making bread or anything like that, but a brewer's yeast is what you need. It's a higher concentrated yeast that when it starts working, it starts working, and in 4 to 6 weeks, your mash is ready. And then you take your mash and then you throw it to a still and distill it down, your mash, and get all the alcohol out of all that juice. So it can be with a small pot still. After you make your mash, we'll go here. Can you see that? It's just it's just a 2-gallon pot. But the secret all happens in here, in the riser. Alcohol evaporates as a melting point, or not melting point, boiling point below water or any other fluids that you're going to have in there. So at about 175, 180 degrees, your alcohol starts melting off, starts evaporating off of your mixture. This is called the riser, and in the riser, from doing a lot of research, I found out that I could add more volume to this tube by adding a copper, like a scrubby, a wash scrubby, and cram those all up in there. So this is all full of copper scrubbies. What that does is it allows the steam, as it rises through the riser, it collects on all the surface areas of that scrungy, and some of it condenses and melts and drops back down into your pot. The rest of the hotter steam will come out and come back through the water jacket. This is a water-cooled jacket. This pipe, the top pipe, runs through the center of this, and this is a larger diameter pipe, so it runs through the larger diameter pipe, and then you have a constant water flow of cold water that comes through and cools the steam as it comes through. So you'll get all your alcohol will just either drip out or pour out. When you first start, it'll pour out, and then after a while it'll start drip. And then you start raising your temperatures up on your mixture a little bit to try to get every little bit out of it, and then you get the flavor of what the apples that we've used or the watermelon that we've used or anything. It'll stay there.
It's kind of wobbly.
There we go. So this is this was our test module. So this is what we did all of our experimentation with and tested what flavors or what ingredients that suited us what we wanted. So, and after everything's said and done, the apples were the best. We've got more concentrate out of that. And out of a 2-gallon pot, the first run that comes off of that is about a quart. About a quart. And then when you take that quart, and once you've gotten everything out of that pot that you can do, then you'll dump that out, and then you put your alcohol, what the first batch, and you'll run it back through and do the same thing again. So when you see the old Moonshine jugs with it had triple X on it, or single X or double X, okay, well that X stood for whether it was distilled 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. So your triple X was the cream of the crop. That's the stuff that has been distilled 3 times. So just about 92% of all your impurities are pulled out, and you don't have to worry about going blind. So luckily, nobody's going blind, and of course, we would all be the first to know. But we always, and we've had a good time with this. So now we've gone to our bigger model, and we can produce about 1 gallon to 2 gallons out of 20 gallons of mash. I have a question. Yes, ma'am.
How many fingers am I holding up?
Yeah, 3. Hadn't started yet. But it's about the love you put into it. We spent a lot of time. I mean, it takes about 8 hours to run 3 out of this size pot. It takes about 8 hours to triple distill a 2-gallon. So it's time consuming, but it's slow. You sit there and watch it drip and wonder, okay, drip, drip, drip. And then it'll finally get there. And so then we started, once we have our concentrate, it comes out, we use a hygrometer to test our alcohol content. And we've had some that have come out of the pot at 160 degrees, 160 proof. And that's a little hot. It's a little too much, and so you try to calm it down a little bit. You either you water it down, or you add some of your mash back into it, some of your cleaner mash. And that, of course, then it's all about the flavor. It's not about the result, but more about the flavor. So that's what I do. That's what I enjoy doing. And it's a holiday thing for me. I enjoy doing it for the holidays and special occasions. But it's just something that we all enjoy doing.
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you test the proof? How do you know what the proof is?
How the fruit is good?
The proof.
Oh, the proof. Oh, the proof. Well, it's always your general rule of thumb is your first batch you throw away. The first batch that runs through the still, you throw it away, because those early temperatures of 165 to 175 degrees, you have your ethanol alcohol that wants to come off. So you want to get rid of that. That's the bad stuff. I mean, that's the stuff you use. You put it aside and use it for part cleaner. It's your mechanic. It's a cleaner. It'll clean anything, but you just don't want to drink it. Yes, sir.
There are Kentucky, Virginia, other bourbons from around the country. Do they differ by location or according to?
I think they differ by location because it's going to have to deal from either the water that's used. I think it has a lot to do with some of the water, because I mean some water is used in the mellow it out a little bit. You use a little bit of mountain water to mellow it out, or to water it down just a little bit. The little jar that I have back on the shelf tonight, if anybody would like to taste it, it's 106 proof. It's right out of the pot. It's triple distilled, so it's absolutely clean. We use a hygrometer to test for alcoholic content, and you can get a rough idea from it. You can get a rough idea from it from just by shaking the jar. Yes, sir.
What's the line between legal and illegal?
Okay, the line between legal and legal. I'm not producing 50 gallons a week.
That's the line?
That's the line. I'm producing enough for my own use and to share.
How much do you charge for a quart?
A quart is usually, we'll get up after the meeting. But the jars and the clear jars, if you shake a moonshine, if you shake, the purer the moonshine is when you shake your jar, there's an amount of bubbles that bubble up. If you've got more water than alcohol, you're going to have bubbles that linger on top of your shine. If you shake your shine and there are no bubbles, then you've got a good batch. You're ready for gasoline and you're ready for fuel. But you want a certain amount of bubbles in your shake, what we call it. You shake it, if the bubbles dissipate really quick, it's good. If you've got bubbles that linger around, well, you've got it a little too weak, or maybe a little weaker than you'd like it to be. Yes, sir.
Are these prototypes or are they for sale?
Are these?
Yeah.
We can always make one. They're not, however big you want to make one, and we can make it. They're not, it wasn't very expensive to make it all.
Other than where they are produced and marketing reasons, what is the fundamental difference between Scotch and bourbon?
Scotch and bourbon. Well, bourbon's going to fall more under your whiskey label, and it all starts from the same thing. It just depends, and your Scotch is made with a different. It's made with grain. I mean, you'll have more of a grain aspect into it than the corn, and that's where the difference, in my opinion, comes in. It's in the mash and how it's made. The distillation process is all the same. You've got the big stills that'll produce gallons an hour, which is the big distillers like Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, and we built this just for a project.
So years ago, when I was a young man, my dad was a West Virginia State policeman, and I used to have to go in the summers and bust moonshine stills as a part of the summer.
Okay.
I was just doing it as, because that's what I was supposed to do. But one of the things as I got older, my dad sat down with me one day and he said, well, you need to understand what good shine tastes like and what it looks like and what it doesn't. And so his theory, and I'm interested in your view, but his theory was he sat down and he took a glass of moonshine and he would light it on the top. And if it burned pure
Blue.
then it didn't have any kind of
Impurities
in it. And if it had some yellowish or amber flicker,
Impurities were there.
you wouldn't want to drink it. So is that a, and
I
I survived to this stage.
flame, I think we do flame test ours too.
Yeah.
We the bottle caps, and let's just see how long it'll burn, you know. Nice little blue flame, and it's really neat. Lighter fluid. Park cleaners, that's that real stuff. And that's the stuff, that first stuff that comes off the still. When you light it, yeah, it'll burn different colors. And it's just like, well, as long as it burns blue, we're all good. Yes, sir.
You talk about the first batch you throw away. What do you mean by the first batch?
The first batch is when you first load your still with your mix, and you first get up to temperature, and you start seeing your first few drips that come out the end. Everybody's excited because there it comes. But after a while, it pours out, and once it starts pouring out, then that's when it's time to take it away, because by then most of the impurities have already steamed off.
So if you start with 2 gallons, you're saying, of mash, and you're cooking it, and you end up with a quart.
At the end.
Basically, you've thrown away.
You throw away almost a third of it.
So okay. So it
Just to
goes
be.
down.
Now, some incredulous people, they'll take that stuff and pour it back into the main max just to give it a little bit more kick, but that's not right.
When do you know? When do you know when to stop throwing it away?
It probably has to do with the taste. The first, what we found so far, the first inch in the jar, it chunk it.
When can you drink it after?
Just to be safe. You can drink it, but you run the risk of it.
Why?
Because you're ethanol, so it's almost like alcohol, you're rubbing alcohol.
You drink it right away?
We'll sample it, we'll taste it and see how.
So after 8 hours, you got a quart. So
Yeah, after 8 hours, I've got a quart.
You put it in a jar and you can drink it then.
It's all good at that point. It's safe. Maybe not, but it's safer. Quantity. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what's the little flower growing out of your still?
That's my thermometer. That gives me the temperature at the top of the riser. So at that point, I know what my temperature is. I know what my melting point. Well, I keep using that one. I don't know, but my boiling point reaches alcohol. I'm watching that point, and when I start going over it, then I try to back it down because I don't want to get water or fruit or too much stuff in my initial first couple mixes.
So you're holding that at like 165 or whatever?
Yes, sir. And I try to bump it up. Sometimes I can get it up to 175 to 180 that I'm getting a really good production early in my run, and then back it off a little bit because like I said, I don't want to add more to it than what I need, what I'm looking for, what I'm trying to get out of it. But we've had pretty good success with it. We have a lot of fun with it, so that's what it's all about. Yes, sir.
Are you a 1X, a 2X, or a 3X?
I'm a 3X guy. Triple X. I like the triple X.
The source of heat.
Sir?
The source of heat.
I use propane. I use a small propane burner with this one for the little one, and I have a bigger propane unit that I use for the big one. Yes, sir.
You keep talking about we decided to build this prototype. Who's we?
I have a couple of my brothers that not blood brothers. We friends of mine that got into this a little while ago, and it was just something for us to do to kill time in the evenings, and it's gotten a little out of hand. Yes, sir.
It seems to me the water source is important. Do you have a preference? Do you use utility water or fresh
I use well water.
well water?
I have my well is 150 foot deep, so it's down in the bedrock. So we have really good water. So I would rather use that than anything else. It just adds a different flavor. I mean, it might add a little sulfur to it, but it's good and healthy. Yes, sir.
Does aging of your particular product make a difference?
I've only started about 2 years ago, So my aging process is not really aged yet. I keep trying to make other things with it. I'm going to try to get to that age level at some time if I have enough time left. You know, it's just 10, 15 years is like, well, I'll leave that for somebody else. But we'll see how that turns out. Yes, sir.
If you wanted to avoid the store-bought premiums for advertising and distributors, et cetera, and just buy some good moonshine, how would you go about doing that? On the internet or
Have to find that local connection. The local connection's really important. Yes, sir.
Are you allowed to sell your stuff?
I don't sell it. I'd rather, some businessman I am, but I like sharing. It's an enjoyment for me. So, holiday season is what I like. If I decide to start selling, well, then I'll be in a bigger production rate. But I'm building up my fan base now. I'm aging my clientele. That's what so to speak.
We need like a cooperative.
Excuse me?
We need like a cooperative where we can all, you know, like the chicken coops. You know, everybody's gonna join together. You know, we all take turns.
I'll take turns minding the still.
Yeah, exactly.
I've done a lot of research, so.
So your secret ingredient, your spices, that goes into the mash?
That goes into my apple mash at the beginning. So it ferments through, and then it also distills through. And you can definitely, what I use, you can definitely tell when it comes through. And not being real bad, but the spice that I use is also known as a natural hallucinogenic. So makes for things a little more interesting. But you don't get that much of it, not enough to tell. So, but the flavor is there, and that's what I look for, is the flavor. So, yes, sir.
What do you do with the mash when you're finished with it? Do you use it for?
I will burn my mash down to there's almost nothing left. It's reduced till it's reduced, and then it gets dumped, and the next batch goes in.
The horses don't like it?
The horses don't like it. I wouldn't give it to the horses. They're not my horses. Excuse me? It could be. It's just it's refuse. It could. Yes, ma'am.
Which apples do you use?
Macintosh.
Stage of the apple?
Macintosh apples are the ones.
Macintosh, and at what stage do you, of the apple mellowing?
I'm sorry, what?
At what stage of the apple mellowing, ripening?
Full ripe. That's when most sugars are in it.
Okay.
Most sugars and most flavors in it. So, and the mash usually takes me 4 to 6 weeks for it to ferment. You'll wait till the first 3 weeks and go in and stir it and check it, and the temperature has to be just in the 50s. It's like curing wine. You don't want to get it too hot, because if it gets too hot, then your ferment process kicks off, and then next thing you know, you've got it's mold and stink, and then it's just time to pour that out and start all over again. But
You keep it in your basement?
I have a garage that I have in, and our pump house is really cool and stays cool all year round. And so it stays, this time of year is when I'm fermenting, because we don't have to worry about the heat. And then a couple more weeks, we'll see. I'm sorry, I had planned to have this operating tonight, and my mash failed. And it was we got too much heat, too much cool, and it just got all moldy, and it's just like, yeah, not this time. But I was hoping to have it set up and running so you could see how slow it is. It's just a small still, but the bigger one, yeah, the bigger one kicks out real well. So we can do 5 to 10 gallons at a time. So it works. And what we're talking about back in the Moonshine days, that stills were built anywhere and everywhere and made out of anything. Anything that they could find, a rusty 50-gallon drum, that's what they mixed the mash in. That's what everything sat in. It's just like, and that's why they get blown up and shot up. And our area here with all the little islands, there's stills, all of these little islands everywhere, and they would bring rum in and drop them off in downtown Beaufort. And of course, Beaufort wasn't as big an area as Charleston County during the Prohibition. Berkeley County was known as Bloody Berkeley because of all the moonshiners in Berkeley County up in Charleston. Al Capone bought his liquor from Berkeley County, Charleston, and has been and reported that he's visited that area as well. So it's been around.
You mentioned rum. How is rum different?
Rum's different. Rum's made from molasses. They use cane and molasses in making rum. It's distilled the same way, but it's aged. Rum's not aged as long as, say, whiskey or scotch.
At what point do the rum and do the molasses and such come in?
The molasses is what they use. The molasses is what's used for your fermentation process because of all the sugar in the molasses. So then they throw a yeast, which the yeast is what starts converting the sugars to alcohol. So, and that flavor from the molasses and the flavor from the cane gives it a very distinctive flavor. So that's where you have your rum flavor. The spirit in it is all the same. It's just in how the alcohol's still there. But rum, tequila's made from cactus, an agave plant, which is sugar-based. And it's basically done the same way. Tequila, it all starts as moonshine. It really all does. It's just how it turns out and how it's made in the end. So, any more questions?
Would you ever make a different kind of moonshine other than your apple?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But changing the corn out, but making it from molasses. Have you tried that?
I'm working on some rum. Working on some rum. Working on the rum. Haven't tried the tequila yet. No, I don't have it. But between the whiskey and the moonshine and a few cordials like the apple pie, that's more of a cordial. Anything's possible. At this point, anything's possible. That's right.
Sorghum. If I use sorghum versus corn, different taste? Or
it's going to give you a different, sorghum's going to give you that molassesy.
Okay.
It's going to be sweet, but yes, it can be used.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. There are more samples back there if you need, so.